Welcome to Cycle Breakers and Moneymakers, a podcast for women of color and first gen who are breaking generational cycles and glass ceilings by going places no one before them has ever gone. I'm your host, leadership coach, and eldest daughter of immigrants, Mariela De La Mora. I left a 16-year marketing career to create a multiple six-figure-a-year coaching business as a single mom. Each week, you'll learn how to build unshakable self-trust, become in demand, lead with confidence, and make more money by being more of who you are.
Hi, you guys. I am coming to you from WeWork, where I'm hanging out with my friend Tiffany. We just kind of had our launches in February. We debriefed and caught up. And it's funny because the last time I recorded a podcast episode in one of those little phone booths in WeWork was the last time I had a six-figure launch. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you guys about today. I don't know what it is. So if the sound is not super great in here, but I wanted to get this out because I closed the doors last week, but I had my final 2 calls for it this week. So it's kind of officially, final. And I held on to it for a bit. And then I finally told my friends, and then I told my coach, that it was a 6-figure launch. One of the folks that applied wound up being a better fit for one-on-one. And I let myself, as always, I'm always honest with anybody that applies, because if I offer a program, it's with integrity. I want them to know that this is absolutely the space for you. And here's why. And I couldn't possibly do that if I didn't also redirect people into one-on-one, or say, I don't even know if I'm the best, fit for you. So every launch I do this, right? Because it's important to me, because if you say yes to working with me, I want to know that you're going to get what you came for, right? So I closed the doors this week, and it's funny because I don't know what I ever thought. This is my 3rd time having a 6-figure launch. My first one was in 2022. It was the first time I launched Reclamation, and I didn't even publicly launch it. I just told people that it was coming, and I just messaged with them privately, and I never posted a link to it to apply. I never posted a public link to it. And honestly, the reason that happened was because I had a lot of warm leads, and I had just been speaking to the same audience for years and years, So never underestimate the power of speaking to the same audience about the same thing for years and years and years. That's the secret, right? It's not very sexy. So that was a 6-figure launch. Then the next 2 weren't. Not that they all should be, but I think after that, it was it gets a little more real, right? Every single launch, you're not relying on warm leads and people who have been watching you for a really long time, right? And then my last launch, my 4th launch, number 4, was for sure the hardest, because that's the one that I had last year. And I was already burnt out and depressed when I went to launch. And everything in me in retrospect didn't have the capacity to energetically allow too many clients into my world, because I was so focused on delivering to the clients that I had. I had this thought of I don't want to let anybody down. And so I really had my head down during this time. And in retrospect, I looked back and I was oh, I really just needed to feel safe to hold what I had. But I also was struggling more in the way that I felt. Most days I felt exhausted. I needed more sleep than I usually needed. And some days I felt great, but overall, I just felt very sluggish and tired. And I also had ADHD burnout. I talked about this in episode 57. So if you want a little backstory, in episode 57, I talk about what happened. But I think that once you have a bigger business and you're serving more clients, you are spending time solving problems, making decisions, and things that are maybe a little bit more out of your strengths. And so I think during that time, all of the systems that we built in order to improve client experience and, just all of that was just a lot more. And then I just had to feel safe to hold what I had. So that was the hardest. Launch 4 was the hardest launch. And then with launch 5, I remember just thinking I don't feel good to go into this launch. I feel I still am in this burnt out, depressed place. And I think I had just realized I was even there. I think before I made it a willpower issue or a mindset issue. But I think in September when I realized oh no, this is actually, I am fundamentally not myself right now. I was finally able to say, okay, so if I'm fundamentally not myself, what do I actually need to do differently, and stop treating it like a mindset thing and start treating it like I have an actual physical injury, right? Even though it wasn't a physical injury, but I had to treat it seriously. If burnout and depression and exhaustion was a physical injury, you would go to the doctor, you would go get vitamins or whatever. in retrospect now, what I know was happening was I had like deficiencies. So like iron deficiency, vitamin D3 deficiency, and ADHD burnout, which made it just like hard to operate. And I felt like overwhelmed all the time. And so that is probably more so what created like the bouts of depression rather than it being like a super depression year. I just think that it was just any little things can happen, but I just ignored it for a really long time. And I think that coupled with like me not feeling safe to grow because I grew so quickly that I needed to just kind of catch up. So when I finally was like going into launch 5, and I just remember being like, I still kind of feel like I'm in the same boat, but I get what I need to do differently. I thought about it and I was like, you know what? It's a good move for me to postpone it. The only reason why I launched at the end of the year was because the last time I had a retreat and I needed to launch like 3 months early in order to, 2-3 months early in order to get people in so that they can make their travel plans. This time I didn't have that. So there was no reason for me to launch so early. So instead I moved it from December to February. And then I took it seriously. I was like, what do I need to give myself? Right. So what I ended up doing that contributed to a 6-figure launch was really look at how would I launch if I didn't feel any differently versus how could I get myself to feel differently. That made me feel safer because I think this whole time I was like, there was almost this dread of, well, I need to get myself out of this. I need to snap myself out of this. Like, what do I need to do? Oh, okay. So I'm going to rest so that I can produce more. Okay. So where's the ideas? It was almost like I never really like allowed myself to be where I was. And that's what made me realize I had grown a business that was very dependent on like me feeling good and feeling confident. And I had kind of artificially propped up my ego with my results. And when I didn't feel good, but my results were based on me feeling good and being in my power and being in my energy, it was like a chicken or the egg situation. It's almost like, okay, well, I need to feel good in order to make money, but then I can't make money because I don't feel good. So like something had to change. So I don't know if you see yourself in this, but I see this now that I have lived through it. I see it everywhere. I had so many conversations when I was having discovery calls for Reclamation where people's income dipped and we're like uncovering like, okay, here's why. It's basically just a business sustainability issue. That's all it is. Or some of my clients who like had massive growth explosions and now they're noticing themselves shutting themselves off to growth because they're so busy with like client delivery and just serving their clients well, which is what happened with me. I had a huge growth year and then I kind of put my head down and was like, oh, okay, let me just do a good job. And then you energetically close yourself off. Not that you should always be striving to grow, but I think that when you don't feel fully safe to hold what you have, we have to look at like what's going on in the business, what's going on in your mind, all the things. So now I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can see it everywhere. So I'm like so excited to solve the problems that I'm going to help people solve in this round of Reclamation because all of the lessons that I have learned over the last 5, almost 6, this is my 6th year in business, is we're bringing it and we're just having such a juicy conversations about like business sustainability, leading with your strengths, really like doing less effectively, doing less, but with like higher profit and more intentionally. All those things are part of, this next round. And I feel like I see it so much differently than I did last round because I'm really seeing now like what were the common threads in all my clients' results? Why? So let me tell you, these are all the things that I did that contributed to the 6-figure launch. And it didn't just happen right before. Like the bigger the launch, the more has gone into it, not just in terms of the brand that you've built leading up to it, right? But also like key decisions. So these are the things that I learned last year that caused me to make different decisions in this launch. So here's what I did differently. So number 1 is I planned for what I call C- capacity instead of A+. So instead of me waiting to feel better, I was like, okay, this isn't sustainable. What if I just feel C-? What would I do? So essentially this came from the fact that I had just kind of pulled myself from burnout, right? And I actually felt really good. This whole launch is the first time that I didn't feel burnt out. And after launching, I actually feel really good. But it did feel a little bit like I was putting gas in the car and then driving it. And then it was on E and then I was putting gas in the car. And so I had to be really cautious with myself this whole launch because launches require a lot of visibility, right? So even though I was feeling good, I also was like, well, yeah, but if you try to do it like you did last time, you're going to burn out. Last time I had a hella content, a bunch of podcast episodes, all types of client interviews. I was going live. I was doing so much. And this time I was like, you have to do less effectively or you're going to have an association with launching requiring every single ounce of energy. And this is me with a team. Last time I launched, I had like a full podcast manager who was doing everything. I was, she was wonderful. She was doing all the things. I hired like a reels manager, someone who was creating reels for me and editing videos for me. Then I had my operations team. And in retrospect, I'm like, wait, I also had a design team. And like at a certain point, they were doing all my stuff. I had like all these freaking team costs. I was spending like $5,000 a month on team. So this time I was like, hold on. Why are we doing all of this? Not only is this kinder to my bottom line to not have to have a big team to launch, it's also kinder to my capacity to say, what can I do that is assuming C- capacity instead of 8+? Immediately for me, the most important things came up. So what I did with my C- capacity, right, which is like I'm asking myself to do less, but what is going to have the highest ROI on my less was I focused on my strengths. My strengths are showing up and talking, right? So part of how, instead of me like teaching and outlining and like doing all the things, that's a little bit harder for me. So one of the things that I did to lead into my strengths was for my workshop, one of the things I dreaded the most and have dreaded every single time is outlining slides. I hate it. I don't feel like myself when I'm like teaching slides, right? So I made the decision that I'm not going to have slides. There were some for key parts of the program, but overall, I opened up my workshop and I just talked to people. And I had a camera that was a little further away so that people could see me on my sofa. I told them I want them to feel like they're in my house with me and they're just talking with me. And that is what I did. I had some talking points. And then I just talked to them. And it was the first time that I ever got compliments on a workshop. Multiple people were saying like how good it was, but I really was just being myself. So it really paid off to lean into my strengths and say, if my strengths are showing up and talking when people meet me at events, when people see me speak, whatever, like they want to work with me, then why don't I just let myself talk and just ditch the slides and just talk to people, right? And obviously I knew what I was going to say, but I didn't need to go behind slides. For me personally, that's just not my strengths. There's some people who are brilliant. They have such teacher brain. They can take any concept and they can bullet point it out. They can do charts. They can do all the things. That's just not me. So when I planning for C- capacity, when you're actually asking yourself to produce less, it matters what you're producing and how you're doing it. So what ended up happening was that workshop took me so much less time because I wasn't spending 20 hours, like literally, I would spend so much time outlining slides and like all the things, right? This is just, I don't even design my own slides. This was me just outlining the bullet points and obsessing over it. I instantly cut that time down. I got my weekends back. I was with my baby. And I sat down with a friend of mine, Dulce, who helped me see like how could ChatGPT help me like take the verbal processing things that I wanted to say and like outline all of the stuff out. So I also leaned heavily on ChatGPT this launch from the perspective of taking the data that I had and getting insights from it. From the perspective of I would verbally process out an email and say, hey, this is what happened. Here's basically what I want to say. And it would outline it. And I was like, please only use my own words. Like, don't paraphrase. This is a conversation I have with ChatGPT. And so I really was able to just like show up and talk and then create emails. And it was so good. And I was like, wow, this is like the easiest, lightest a launch has ever felt. So like leaning into ChatGPT to kind of be not pulling insights from my applications, pulling insights from sales call transcripts, pulling insights from past applicants from the program. All of those things really helped for me to not have to rely on my own brain and intuition, because you at a certain point can't run your business if you're always asking yourself the questions versus looking at what data do I already have? So that's another way that I planned for C- capacity is number one, I lean into my strengths. And number two, I looked at the data that I already had around me instead of me coming up with all the ideas, right? You shouldn't be just coming up with ideas. It's like, what are your clients actually saying? Like we should always be looking at what is happening in those client relationships, right? Another thing that I did this launch was I doubled down on showcasing my client results. My client results, I knew were like, holy crap, these are so good. Like my client results are so good. And I had trouble owning them because they happened so differently. It wasn't like, oh, they followed my exact formula framework. My formula is more concepts. It's unmet need. Every single person identified and clarified their unmet or emerging need in the market. They all clarified their thought leadership around that unmet need. They all clarified what their visibility strategy should look like based on where their biggest connections are and or their strengths. So they aligned their visibility with their strengths. And in some, visibility was within their network and not online. For some, visibility was speaking. For others, visibility was their teaching skill. So they were like running workshops on or lives on LinkedIn and repurposing it to other platforms, right? So visibility instead of like posting on social media, right? Like we look bigger. We don't just market on social media. We say visibility. Marketing is visibility, like people knowing you exist and then building a relationship with them, period, right? So every client had this in common because this is my process. But I think before really looking at the client results and creating case studies around them, it felt almost like I had a harder time explaining like this is all part of Reclamation. But when we actually looked, and I say we because I worked with one of my clients, Kiera, and her agency, KLC The Studio. So like we literally sat down for like 3 hours on a Friday. And I was like, I'm going to verbally process. She like asked me all the questions. And I was like, all right, let's just go through as many clients as we possibly can. We have so many clients. Let me just tell you, like I interviewed some of these clients. I knew like what they shared with me as far as their results. And I just shared all of that, you know, with her and her team. And they were able to help me like put the case studies together, which was something that was really hard for me to do because I was too close to it. So we doubled down on showcasing client results by looking at how the results had happened. And that was a key core part of this launch. Like I may not have gone live and like bid on stories every day, but one of the things I did do was show my receipts. I really showed my receipts this launch to be like, I'm going to show you how this program helps you book out and multiply your demand and multiply your income, even under all these different business models and even under all these different circumstances. And even with service-based versus coaching versus consulting versus people who work with B2B and versus all the things, right? So that's one thing that I was like, if I'm going to do less, let me make sure it's a high ROI less. What is going to sell a mastermind? People need to know, how do you get people results? Who has gotten results? How did you do it, right? So that's another way that I did less effectively by really doubling down on my client results. I also allowed myself to tell that story multiple times. Don't just do a client case study and put it up there. We sent it by email. We also put it on the feed as a carousel post because it's a lot more storytelling. There were people who didn't react to it in one medium that reacted to it in another. We also put them all in a website so that you could read through all of them. I really wanted them to see like, here's the process, like here's what everybody, you know, had in common in their results. And I also had my clients review them, which was very important. I sent it to my clients and I said, correct me if I'm wrong. Here's your success story. Please tell me. And many of them did. They were like, actually, it's this. Or no, I don't work with these organizations. Or like, oh no, actually, this is what happened when we started working together. This was the situation before. And I was like, cool. That was important to me because I, in the past, have been featured as a success story, but my before I worked with them was painted in a much more like negative light than it really was. And I would read it and I was like, nobody said this to me. This is literally not true. And I didn't like it. And I was like, I don't ever want anybody to feel that way. So for me, the client case studies were like a crown jewel of this launch. And even me as a marketer needed, you know, needed another marketer to help me bring these to light. So I'm very grateful for my client who wound up being able to help me bring these to light, because this sometimes in a program, you've already done the hard work of helping the clients get results. And this is even if you work with clients one-on-one, you've done the hardest work of getting the results and you just need to talk about them more effectively, not just in putting testimonials out there, but in telling the story of how get your best clients, the results that you're like, this is what I want people to know. If you think you've talked about it, you probably haven't. Go break it down and say, where was this person? What is it that they had to like work through? What is the process that you brought them through? Where are they now? Like all the different things. That was so important for me. Effectively do less, but create more, because there were so many people who referenced those client case studies to the extent that they were actually like, wow, I didn't realize Reclamation was such a high level program for like people who, you know, who create these results. And And it is. And I think I just had to like own that, right? So that's another thing that I did this launch is I doubled down on showcasing results, and not just results, like, screenshots or like wins. It was truly case studies. And many of you listening, if you've been in business for a couple of years, you probably have really, really good ones. And if you need help doing that, you could either run some of those through ChatGPT and say, hey, I want a case studies outline, or you can, work with a coach that can help you do that. That's something I can help my clients do, or you can work with an agency, like I did with my client Kira, and they are wonderful. And so I think anybody that can help you get those things out of your head and into a way that you can market them is so important. So that's another thing that I did in this launch. So far I've mentioned like what I really did differently in this launch was plan for C- capacity, double down, like really, really market with my strengths and let everything else be a bonus. I looked at what my biggest opportunities were, which was client results. And I really, really focused on those instead of just more volume or all of that, because I knew that I had already done the hard work of having a program that helped people get results. So I did that. And then I matched my messaging to the clients that had gotten the program promise. So now that I had run it a couple of times, I was really like, okay, I'm seeing like a disparity between like who is actually in the best position to get the best results from this program. So rather than leaving it to my own brain, I went to ChatGPT. I uploaded all of my applications from the beginning of the program, and then I separated them out from the folks who had gotten at least the result of doubling their demand, because it's double your demand, then you book out, then you scale beyond booking out. And this helped me see what group A needed versus what group B needed. What I realized was there was a group A and they were probably a better fit for my one-on-one. And then there was group B. And then I was like, okay, group B got the result. Like, what was it that they had in terms of foundations? What that allowed me to do was market more specifically this time to the people who this program was the best fit for, which meant I had to elevate my messaging, which meant I had to deal with the fact that I felt like I was probably isolating some people who were like self-selecting out of applying. And I was okay with that, and I'll probably do some clarification next launch as well to just be like, here is when it's actually not a good fit for you. And I think I did do that in a few emails of like, this is truly when it isn't a good fit. If you don't identify with this, then it is a good fit, right? So I elevated my messaging to match my clients' results so that everybody who is in this round is like exactly, it is made for every single one of them. And that was on purpose, right? So if you have sold an offer a few times and you want to know how can you speak more directly to the clients that have gotten the best results and explore why they got those results, look at their applications, look at kind of what they already had in place, look at like what is it that they did in the program, like all those things. And then you're sort of figuring out like, okay, if you have more than one offer, who's a better fit for one than the other? That's what we did. So really with this, it's like, it wasn't just about like, oh, calling in best clients. I've heard people say that. And I'm like, all my clients are my best clients. I love all of my clients. For me, it's more fit. And I have a responsibility to be able to advise on fit. And that's what I did in this last launch. So to just like recap, like it really was a lot of intentional decisions around, like I said, capacity, leading with my strengths, leading with my biggest opportunities, really showcasing, my client results, and creating systems like using ChatGPT, like using data instead of my own brain and intuition and clarity, because you don't, as much as that's like wonderful, that isn't always going to feel as accessible to you, especially in different seasons, especially, when you don't feel good, or let's say you have kids, or you go through a year where you're depressed, or you go through a grief year and you're just grieving and you're sad. And like that does make it harder, right? So I think I feel so much less afraid of being human in my business. That's really what it is. I feel less afraid to be human. I feel less afraid of things happening. It's almost as if my little business was not a little business. I mean, I made $1 million, but it feels like my business was a house and it just went through a rainstorm, and the rain illustrated all of the holes in the roof and all of the cracks in the windows. And now it was just piece by piece fixing those holes, fixing those gaps, sealing up the windows. And that's really all it is. And if you've been in business long enough, inevitably you're going to go through a year like that where it just kind of shows you what your gaps are and what is not sustainable. And I feel like I am now so much more aware of what those look like and able to help my clients with it, because so many of them made it mean something like I lost my success, or I lost my demand, or I got all these clients and then I just sort of shut down. So like that just proves I wasn't meant to receive that success in the first place and it was a fluke. Like so much of sustainability is feeling safe to hold your growth and feeling equipped to bounce back after difficult times. I'm going to say that again. Sustainability is really just about you feeling safe to hold the growth you've already created, or feeling equipped to bounce back after a difficult season. And this really taught me both, because that was me. That was me in both ways. It was me feeling safe to continue to grow after a huge launch where I welcomed 17 people in and how that affected my identity. And it was then how it affected me and my business and being able to bounce back into this last launch, which was a 6-figure launch. And I think it's just that feeling of like, not unstoppable, right? But just safe for life to happen, safe for me to be myself, safe to make different decisions and to rely on different strengths. Because I think for the longest time, I was like, my strength is just my energy and my storytelling and, all of that. And when I stopped doing that as much, it's very easy to be like, well, now I can't succeed because like, either you don't want to, or sometimes you just don't desire to, right? I know a lot of people who started their businesses like during the pandemic, and during that time we were like at home and not socializing. And so for a couple of years, it was like fun and easy to show up and talk on stories and all of that because it was like where you were socializing. But it's also totally fine for you to say, you know what, I know I could do that, but I actually don't want to. I just want to live my life. I don't want to have to think about showing what I'm doing because people are used to hearing from me on stories. I just don't want to. I want to be able to just like put my phone down and like be present with my family. I want some of those moments to be for me. I don't owe people access to every aspect of my life, right? And so part of this as well is also just you feeling safe to do business differently and for you to evolve and for you to change and for you to say, I have many strengths, but I'm choosing to anchor into these. I'm choosing to do business differently. So yeah, that's really what I learned. And whether it was a 6-figure launch or not, I think what it really just showed me is that 2024 was more of the outlier in terms of my business. And because I think so much of last year, I was just like, oh my gosh, it feels like successful me created this life and got us this house and this car. And like, now I can't keep it up. Like some people will say that depression feels like that. That's what I told myself a lot last year, which was really, really mean. This was really mean, right? But I now look back and I'm just like, no, it always was me. I just needed something that I wasn't giving myself, which was slowing down, which was compassion, which was doing business differently, doing less, but more effectively, and allowing myself to evolve and change versus trying to force myself to be 2020 me or 2022. I think I just was comparing. I think if you notice yourself ever comparing yourself to past versions of you, you're also judging who you are right now. You're also judging where you are. And that's what keeps us in like the stage of not solving our problems, because I for sure would say I didn't solve my problems because I was judging where I was and I was judging who I was being, and I was trying to get myself back to 2022 Mariella, 2023 Mariella. And it's like, well, what if I am just exactly the way I am right now? How do I want to do business? How do I want to show up for myself? So y'all, it was a lot. I will even say that while you saw a 6-figure launch, right? What allowed me to, that most people will never realize, what allowed me to do that was the support system that I had, was me going through a whole period of like sitting with my feelings instead of trying to like achieve my way out of them, and really looking at how I felt about myself when I didn't have my results to prop me up that I normally did. So I thought I was confident and that I loved myself, but you don't really know how you feel about yourself or what your relationship with your business is until you have a hard time, until you don't have the shiny result to like lean on in that season. And that was like a hard truth, but I was like, damn, I thought I was confident and loved myself, but look at how I'm showing up and look how I'm talking to myself in the absence of those results, which is really why even as I talk about something like a 6-figure launch, I'm also being very mindful, because that isn't necessarily, that's not what I wanted to find myself by. What I want to showcase with this is that bigger results aren't just the result of what you did in the weeks prior, and they aren't just the result of strategy. They are also the result of how we show up for ourselves and allow ourselves to be supported, and the decisions that we are able to make from that place versus trying to do more versus mind over matter. And that not everything is a mindset issue. Sometimes it truly is. You are needing something. You need to grieve. You need to recover from burnout. You need something. So that's what I really wanted to showcase, is the non-strategy elements of something that we put this shiny label on, like a 6-figure launch, that maybe for some, their results are purely strategy. For me, that's not the case. That had been a while since I had launched. For me, it's almost always mostly life and who I'm being, and then a little like strategy sprinkled in there, because the person creating the strategy has to feel safe. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what strategy I'm creating. If me as a human doesn't feel safe, if me as a human doesn't have the identity to match what I'm trying to call in, if me as a human is burnt out and depressed, right? So it's a human first way of doing business that I've always done. And I really wanted to showcase what was behind it. Yes, there was strategy, but it wouldn't have mattered if I didn't allow myself to accept where I was and say, what does business look like with C- capacity? So that being said, y'all, thank you for being here and for listening. I'd love to hear any questions you have. And yeah, just any reflections that you've got currently. So, Reclamation doors reopen in September. So you can join the wait list, but you also can work with me privately. So on my website, if you click on the application, there are 3 different options for private coaching: monthly calls, biweekly calls, and weekly calls. Most of my clients fall into the biweekly or the monthly. The only people I ever work with on a weekly basis are typically the people who do not have a business and they are starting completely from scratch. But I think that I tend to call in a lot of clients with existing businesses. They tend to fall into the biweekly. So have a look, send me any questions that you've got, and we will go from there. Thank you for listening. I hope you all have a beautiful week.